And now, please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, this passage in Jeremiah 32, I think, is, or at least I will say, is one of my favorite passages in the Hebrew Bible. It's so full of emotion. It's so taut with stuff that's going on. And when I first read it through, I have to confess, lo, these many years ago, I didn't think much of it. But since then, every time I've come across it, I'm like, yes, Jeremiah. So what's going on here for those of you who might not be familiar with the story? I won't put you on the spot to see who knows the book of Jeremiah and who doesn't. That's how you could tell who grew up Southern Baptist and who didn't. Jeremiah is, unsurprisingly, the leading character of our story for today. And if you know anything about him, his life has been anything but easy. According to the book that bears his name, he was called to be a prophet right when he was in his mother's womb, from birth. But this is not something that Jeremiah ever really wanted or sought out. Time and again, in the book of Jeremiah, we find these various laments where Jeremiah pours out his heart as he wishes that this was that he could do something other than that which God has called him to do. If you've read through the book, you know he is ostracized from those around him for his prophecies. And he keeps saying, he wishes that he could just keep his mouth shut and live a nice, quiet life in the suburbs somewhere, 2.2 kids, the white picket fence. And yet, God has placed this fire within him, this irrepressible fire within him that makes it that he just has to speak up. And the content of Jeremiah's various prophecies is the same. Judah, the land of Judah, has not followed the ways of God. Judah has worshipped gods other than Yahweh. Judah has oppressed her people. The temple cult and the priests are corrupt, and God would punish Judah for her sins. And the instrument of God's wrath would be Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. As you can imagine, this didn't go over well among the people of Judah. And so in punishment for Jeremiah's prophecies, he was thrown in prison. But of course, Jeremiah was right. His prophecies did come true. In the year 597, the Babylonians invaded and conquered Judah. They took away the leaders of Judah into Babylon and installed a puppet king of their choosing. And for 10 years, Judah served as a client state of Babylon. But in 587, the Israelites decided to rebel, and the armies of Babylon returned. This time, the Babylonians would not be so kind to those they conquered. So that is the background for our passage this morning. Jeremiah is, once again, in prison for his prophecies against Judah. He's seen as a traitor to his people. Meanwhile, the Babylonian army is literally at the city gates of Jerusalem. Their numbers are overwhelming. The city of Jerusalem is doomed. And those in Jerusalem knew what conquest would mean. Again, this was the ancient world. Conquering armies were not kind. Their homes would be looted of all their valuable possessions. Men, women, and children would be indiscriminately killed and raped. Those in Jerusalem were terrified, and rightfully so. And in the midst of this situation, the word of the Lord comes to Jeremiah. His cousin Hanamel would like to seek him out on behalf of his uncle to buy their ancestral plot in Anathoth, or Anathoth, depending on how you want to pronounce it, located less than 3 miles outside the city walls of Jerusalem. By Israelite custom, family members had the right of first refusal on a plot of land so that that land could be kept within the family. And we're not told why Jeremiah's uncle is seeking to sell his plot of land. Perhaps he's in debt. Then again, maybe he is scared about what will happen when the Babylonians conquer Jerusalem and what's going to happen to his land. The armies of Babylon literally stood between Jeremiah and this land that he was proposing to buy. And then Jeremiah, while under house arrest within the city walls, buys this land. He does it in a very public way so that all can see what he's doing. It's a prophetic action, and In case there's any doubt as to why Jeremiah is doing what he is doing, he says, "For thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, houses and fields and vineyards shall again be bought in this land." In the face of destruction and loss, Jeremiah affirms that God will yet again be with Judah. It's remarkable to see what fear of loss can do to our psyches. While human beings have an innate desire for more, we always seem to want more of everything. Nothing motivates us quite like losing what we have. Financial advisors will regularly talk to their clients about their appetite for risk. It's less about maximizing long-term returns for many people than about securing what positive gains they have. The stock market might go up by 20%, but if that same portfolio drops by 10%, there's panic. That money is lost. We see this type of panic in some of the market swings, especially in the beginning of COVID. Fear of losing what we have can be overwhelming at times. Now, I was a wrestler back in high school. I don't know if you can picture that, but it wasn't that bad either, so it was good fun. Our coach used to counsel us on how to face the mental struggle of a wrestling match. And he would point out that what often causes us to give up, to let ourselves get pinned, was the anticipation of pain. We anticipate the negative future and what it might be like, and that anticipation gets in our minds and builds up in it, and as that fear builds, we lose the spirit to keep on going. He told us that if we could put it out of our minds, this anticipation of pain, the anticipation of a negative future, we would be surprised what we could handle when the present moment came. In much the same way, in much the same way, the anticipation of loss, the fear of it, can immobilize us. Now, once the loss occurs, we usually can readjust, create a new plan, find a way forward. But when we are captured by our fear of loss, it can be debilitating. Think of what some of those moments have been for you. Those moments when, like those in Jerusalem, you feared for the future. Was it fear of economic loss? You lost your job or were about to. You had no idea how you were going to pay your bills. If you lost your job later in life, what does that mean for your retirement? Would you even ever be able to retire? Perhaps this fear appeared during the 2008 financial crisis when you saw the values of your investments or your home drop. You had so many plans, so many hopes for the future. Then, suddenly, they vanished and were replaced by an overwhelming anxiety. Or maybe you worried about a mountain of debt that you had incurred. I remember my dad telling stories of the last great period of inflation in the early 1980s and the ensuing rise in interest rates. He was trying to start a small business, but the interest he had to pay on his loan was 20%. You can imagine that. And the fear of what that meant kept him from sleeping night after night. So he would get up and just play solitaire to distract himself. Another debilitating fear of loss is a fear of embarrassment or shame. One of my aunt and uncle's good friends lost his job several years ago, but he was so ashamed of it that he never told his wife. The family kept up their normal life in total ignorance. He would pretend as though he was going to work every day. Weeks passed, then months. Finally, this friend of my aunt and uncle's couldn't keep the truth from his wife any longer. The stress of the shame was so great that he had a nervous breakdown and had to be committed to a psychiatric ward. We can also be overcome by fear of physical or mental loss. Our bodies and minds are fragile. They deteriorate over time, even if we do the best we can to try and keep them in shape. What happens when you see it happening? You notice the new wrinkles forming on your face, those pounds that you can't quite keep off anymore. New aches and pains crop up along with a whole new list of medications. You begin to forget things, and you do your best to hide it. These fears of loss are real. What about the fear of a loss of community? You have to move to a new place. What will it be like? It's far harder to make new friends the older you get. Will you be alone? Fear of loss is everywhere. We have all experienced it, and perhaps you are experiencing it now. It is because it's so common and can be so debilitating that it's helpful to look more closely at our passage for this morning. Here, the fear of loss is palpable. The Babylonians are at the gates of the city. People are in a panic about what will happen. Remarkably, Jeremiah does not panic. He's been through so much suffering in his life that he's not overwhelmed by fear. He's able to think clearly and act with confidence. How? How is he able to do that? I want that. While I was wrestling with that very question this week, I picked up a copy of Michael Singer's book, The Untethered Soul. The Untethered Soul addresses how we can thrive when set amidst a world of constant fear of loss. Singer opens his book, for those of you who have read it, Singer opens his book by talking about the voice that's inside our heads. You know that? You know that voice that's always critical of what you're doing? I'm sure you know that voice quite well. The voice that keeps you up at night with that endless cycle of thoughts. That very same voice inside your head goes on overdrive when there's a fear of loss. It tears you apart inside, even can make you nauseous, and it won't let you go. I'm sure you know that voice quite well. So why is it there, Singer asks? It's there because it actually helps you interpret the world around you. Something happens to you, and this voice within you places it within a particular narrative of your life. That can be quite helpful. But when you're feeling overwhelmed, that same voice can become destructive. Singer encourages us to see that voice for what it is. It's merely a thought inside our heads. It has no reality outside us. No one else hears that inner voice. It is what Singer calls our inner roommate. And when it goes on overdrive, we should ask ourselves not, what do I do about this problem that I keep obsessing over? But instead ask, what part of me is disturbed by this? Do you notice that shift in perspective, what it does? We need to see the voice inside our head for what it is and then get some objectivity in relation to it. Singer writes, quote, "To attain true freedom, you must be able to objectively watch your problems instead of being lost in them. No solution can possibly exist while you're lost in the energy of a problem. The first problem you have to deal with is your own reaction." Once you can give objectivity to that inner voice, once you can separate it from yourself, once you can name within yourself what part of you is disturbed by this problem, you can more easily deal with your emotions around something. This is what Singer claims. And I have to admit, Singer's method helped me this past week when I was feeling overwhelmed. I named the part in me that was overwhelmed and was giving energy to that inner voice. And it did help me gain some objectivity from that inner voice. It gave me better awareness of what was going on inside my body and allowed me to put things in perspective. Now, I'd like to think that Jeremiah was able to do something like that in our text for this morning. Unlike those around him, Jeremiah was able to gain perspective on his fear of loss, his anxiety. He doesn't panic. And that gives him the sense to listen to God's voice and then to decide to buy that land in Anathoth. And what Jeremiah is able to do in this action, in this buying of his ancestral land, is to claim his own identity. He's able to be himself in the face of the fear of those around him. At his core, Jeremiah loves Judah. He's always loved Judah. He loves the land of his birth. He loves his people. Jeremiah critiques his own people and their rulers because of his love for them. He hates seeing them disobey God. He dreads what will happen to those that he cares about. He loves them so much and loves God so much that he endures a very hard life. It's the same love that leads him to buy that plot of ancestral land. It's his family's land. Of course he will buy it. It's part of who he is, who God made him to be. For this is what we can do in the face of fear. Once we're able to get some objectivity from our emotions, we are able to try and live into who God made us to be. While facing loss, we can ask ourselves who we are and how we can live into that in spite of what might be happening at the time and how fearful we might be. During the pandemic, one of my good friends lost his job. And it was a very good paying job. But the firm he worked for collapsed during the pandemic. Now, this firm had its struggles beforehand, but the pandemic put the nail in the coffin, so to speak. And without a job, this friend of mine was out of luck. He had bills to pay. Unemployment didn't come close to covering his expenses. So he got out of his apartment lease, downsized his car, moved in with his family. This was in his 50s, by the way. Then, in his 50s, he began a master's course in human resources that he could take online. It was something that he knew he could do, and he knew there were jobs in that field for him, but it wasn't something he wanted to do. He was responding out of fear of loss. He felt he was out of options, so he would rather take the safest path that he could find. And as he and I talked about this during the pandemic, it made sense to me. But as fate would have it, this friend also spent a good time of the pandemic with one of his friends who was a therapist. And over many long talks, that therapist helped him see who he was, who God made him to be. She helped him to see that he wouldn't be happy working in this HR field, even though it might bring him a sense of security. In the end, he listened to her and actually decided to follow what he really wanted to do. He knew that life was very short. And instead of finishing this master's program, he did go out and follow his passion. Then tragically, this woman, this friend of his, died of a heart attack, a stroke, before the age of 70. And that convinced him, yes, time is short. I've got to do what God has made me to be. And you know what? In the time since then, I've never heard him once say that he regretted his decision. He bought his own land in Anathoth, and once his therapist friend allowed him to transcend his anxiety and see the world anew. What a powerful testimony that Jeremiah gives us. In times of fear, find objectivity from that inner voice. Ask yourself what part of you is afraid and why. Why is that inner voice speaking to you? Then, once you can get distance from those emotions, seek out your true self. For Jeremiah, it was his love of God and his love of Judah. He had to buy that land in Anathoth because that's what made him true to himself. And how can you be true to yourself in those moments when you're overcome by fear of loss? The final thing that we see here in this passage is Jeremiah discerning the moment that he is in. It's often been said that the job of a prophet is to afflict the comfortable and to comfort the afflicted. And that is Jeremiah. He spent his whole life up to this point afflicting the comfortable in Judah, prodding them to be their better selves, calling out their bad behavior for the good of the whole. Then, when things are at their worst, he buys his ancestral land as a symbolic gesture of comfort. Houses and fields and vineyards shall again be bought in this land. Symbolic efforts can have a big impact on calming people's fears. Let's say you're faced with a difficult diagnosis, one that shakes your world and those whom you love. And then you decide to go out and do something symbolic, something that affirms life. You decide to go on a trip with your family. You go out to eat at your favorite restaurant to embrace the good that is life. You put on your favorite music and dance. These actions don't change things. They don't end the outcome or change the diagnosis. But they are a symbolic gesture that can give you hope. Jeremiah's purchase of land did not chase the Babylonians away, but it did say, have hope, life goes on, even in hard times. I found it remarkable, as I was looking through the text for this week, I found it remarkable that the lectionary brings up this particular text at this time. We here at FCC are embarking on a period of transition. I am embarking on a major period of transition. I've accepted a call that will lead me back to the Boston area and to the church of my youth. And it'll be up to you all to find a new minister to lead you in the years ahead. These types of transitions are often times of fear and uncertainty. And there's a temptation to withdraw, to wait on the sidelines and see what'll happen. Inevitably, there are times when a voice appears in your head. What will happen? Will the church be okay? What if the interim period takes a long time? What if we can't find a good candidate? It's precisely at times like these when this text from Jeremiah can be such a help. Jeremiah didn't let the fear or uncertainty of his situation overwhelm him. We can ask ourselves, where does that fear come from? Is that voice being helpful or harmful? Oftentimes, especially in a context like this one, that voice comes from the fact that you love this place. That's a good thing. Periods of transition can be times of fear and uncertainty, but they can also be times of great excitement and hope. This is an opportunity to discern the gifts and talents that you want in a new minister and who you want to take you in the next journey for FCC. How do you see FCC in the future? How do you become even more an oasis of progressive Christianity? What would that look like? What would the ideal leader look like? These are some of the questions that you get the opportunity to ask. And while that voice of fear might be in there somewhere, it's also important to see where it comes from and put it in perspective. This congregation is in excellent shape. It continues to grow and attract new people. The finances of the church are excellent. We have a beautiful campus that's well cared for. We're immersed in a community. We have a thriving farmers market. This is a time when you can assert who God is calling you to be as a congregation. You are a great oasis of progressive Christianity. Lean into that. I mean, next Saturday is this Sylvia Rich's lecture. We're leaning into that. Welcome people here and spread that good news. Worship with fervor and creativity. Keep connecting more deeply with those in the church. Volunteer to do something now. There's a long list of opportunities in the bulletin each week. Jeremiah bought land in his hometown because that's where his heart lay. What can you do? What symbolic action can you make to show your commitment to this place and its values at this particular time? This is when it's needed. For instance, we're approaching the annual stewardship season. Want to buy land in Anathoth? Increase your pledge to FCC. And in so doing, show your commitment to the amazing place that FCC is. We're also at a time of year we'll be looking for people to serve on boards and committees. Explore what part you can play. Buy that land. Be like Jeremiah. This is an exciting time at FCC. It's a time for dreaming. It's a time to look to the future. The success of this transition will depend on how you approach it. Houses and fields and vineyards shall again be bought in this land. Remember that. Lean into that. And watch as amazing things continue to happen around here. And you can be a part of it. All you have to do is go out and buy a piece of this land.